Good morning. Those of you just joining us, welcome to the 20th Annual Columbus River College and Sacramento State Center for Practical and Professional Ethics Fall Ethics Symposium, The Ethics of Disagreement. Honors students and honors program alumni from Columbus River College are serving as session chairs at this year's symposium. It's my pleasure to introduce the chair for this session, Mahin Naveed.
Thank you, Dr. Schubert. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mahin Naveed, and I'm pleased to be the chair for this session. After this introduction, the session will consist of our main speaker's presentation, which will be around 40 minutes long. And after the presentation, we'll hear from our formal respondents, and which the speaker will have a chance to reply to them. And finally, the floor will be open for further questions and comments to you, our audience members, for any further questions and comments. Please note that this event is being filmed for broadcast by the Sacramento Educational Cable Consortium. Our speaker for this session is Hrishikesh Joshi. Dr. Joshi is an assistant professor of philosophy at the University of Arizona, and he's also a core faculty member at the Center of Philosophy of Freedom. His research focuses on normative issues at the intersection of philosophy, economics, and politics. He also works on ethical theory and metaethics. He has written and published a book called Why It's Okay to Speak or Mind. Today, however, Dr. Joshi is here to speak us about the duty to speak and the duty to listen. Please join me in welcoming Professor Joshi.
Hey, thanks for the introduction, and it's great to be here and great to be part of this event. I think we need more events like this. So, all right. So I'm going to talk about. So this is this event is on the ethics of disagreement, and my talk is going to be about how much productive disagreement matters, and the duties we have both to speak our minds and to listen, especially listen to those with whom we disagree. I mean, that's the most important part, because we can listen to people who we agree with all day long, but it's the challenging part is listening to those whom we disagree and those who might challenge our views. So, okay, so here's why the duty to speak, or this idea of speech and self-censorship is interesting. So this is a survey from 2020, so it's a bit dated. Maybe things have improved since then. I think maybe a little bit. Okay, so this was from 2020, and 40% of Americans, it said, feel hesitant to speak their minds. What's interesting is this goes up with education. So high school graduates feel the least hesitant to speak, and it goes up every degree level. So I wonder what's happening there. So bachelor's, master's, and then the PhDs, like us, speak are most hesitant. Okay, and that's 3 times what it was at the height of McCarthyism. So McCarthy was this senator who went after suspected communists in the 50s. This was a big, people called this the Red Scare. So 3 times of that. I mean, that's kind of disheartening. Okay, so you might think, hey, what's the big deal? The speaking your mind, or like self-censorship. So self-censorship is this idea where, you might disagree with people, but you say, I'm not going to say that. I might just get in trouble, or I might lose friends. So that's roughly self-censorship. So it's not like somebody else telling us, hey, you can't say it, but you prevent yourself beforehand from saying it, right? So that's self-censorship. You might think, hey, look at the world, and there's there's global poverty, there's climate change, there's a war between Russia and Ukraine, there's the Israel-Palestine conflict, and you might think, okay, so why should we care about self-censorship? Maybe it should be issue number 427 or something, and especially, maybe it seems like a first world problem or something. Okay, and maybe, hey, maybe it's a sign of progress. So people used to say all kinds of stuff, and now they feel hesitant. Maybe it's a good thing, at least in certain cases. That's what you might think, and I'm going to try to argue that that's not right. Okay, so here's the meta problem. So I think so speech is a sort of meta problem. So whether we can discuss our ideas and kind of productively contribute to a picture of the world is a meta problem. So whatever problems you have that you want to solve, right? So world peace, world poverty, all these domestic issues. The first thing you have to do before you get to the sort of what we might call first order policy issues is figuring out what the world is like. And if you're mistaken about what the world is like, whatever you do is going to be probably counterproductive. So here's one example. So this is Chernobyl, this nuclear plant sort of meltdown that happened in modern-day Ukraine under the Soviet era. And basically what happened was this nuclear plant melted down, and they didn't get people evacuated in time. And as a result, a lot of people lost their lives and had medical issues. But the issue wasn't like a logistical issue. It wasn't like, oh, they didn't have enough trucks to get people out or buses or something. It was that the incentives under the USSR were such that people at every point in the chain felt that they couldn't really say how bad it was. So, they didn't want to displease their bosses up the chain, right? So each person was like, it's not a big deal, it's not a big deal. And by the time the upper command in the Soviet Union figured out what was happening, it was kind of too late, right? So it was almost like there was an information problem, not a logistics problem. And why was there an information problem? Because people didn't say what they were seeing, right? So they didn't share their information. They didn't speak. They didn't speak about what was happening. Another sort of angle at this is like you look at the Allies in World War II, and the Allies, won World War II. So they were successful. You might think, okay, what was the exact advantage? I mean, was it just a military? Was it just sort of like bigger planes, bigger bombs, or what was it? And maybe that was part of it. The atomic bombs, pretty big bombs, So, okay, so maybe that was one thing. But another advantage people had was sort of described by this Luther Gulick, who was a sort of public policy expert at the time in around World War II. He said, well, look, in Japan and Germany, plans were, as in his words, hatched in secret by a small group of partially informed men and then enforced through dictatorial authority. So part of what was going on was the sort of fog of war was greater on their side because there wasn't this ethos of free expression and sharing of information. So what does this mean? It means that if we the more sort of the more censorious the atmosphere is, the more we self-censor, the more likely it is that we're going to end up with a sort of inaccurate picture of the world. And when you have an inaccurate picture of the world, when you don't know what the world is like or when you don't know what's going on, then whatever policy you care about, the sort of steps we take are going to probably be counterproductive. Okay, so you might think, okay, well, we live in a democracy. We don't live in authoritarian regimes like World War II Germany or Japan. I want to say, hey, look, maybe democracies are much better with allowing people, here we have the First Amendment, and that allows people to say things without having to go to jail. The question was, somebody was talking about maybe in the UK, it's sort of eroding already. Okay, but again, as the case of the UK points out, they're not immune to problems. And a lot of the things that people self-censor about, they're not necessarily like afraid of the law, right? When you imagine like you're in a group discussion in class or something and you say, oh, I think that, but I'm not going to say it. You're not like worried about the police coming and taking you to jail, right? You're sort of worried about, well, what's my professor going to think about me? What are my peers going to think about me, etc. So we're much more sensitive to these social costs, right? Not necessarily legal costs. And you have democracy doesn't mean the social costs go away, right? Maybe the First Amendment makes the legal costs, or the police are not going to take you away for saying something, but we fear social pressures. Okay, so here's, I just want to back up and give a bit of a feel for this idea I'm going to push, which is, look, in the modern context, we rely on others. So we're not, I'm a philosopher, so just put it in terms of philosophy, we're not epistemically self-reliant. Most of what we know comes from others. So, for example, I know there's a country called Brazil, but I've never been there. So how do I know that? Well, I might go on Wikipedia and see there's a country called Brazil, or I have some friends that went to Brazil. They come back, they say it's a nice place. So okay, so that's how I know that Brazil exists, right? So it's not, but I'm not verifying that by myself. I know there's a planet called Neptune. Never seen it. I trust the scientists to tell me. Okay, so much of how much of what you know can you directly verify? Can you directly verify there's a conflict in Israel and Palestine? It's like, not unless you go there, right? You read about it in the news, right? So, okay, so we trust, we rely on others. This is a nice book called The Knowledge Illusion: Why We Never Think Alone. These are cognitive scientists at Brown. So they say language, memory, attention, indeed all mental functions can be thought of as operating in a way that's distributed across a community according to a division of cognitive labor. So what this brings out is, so there's a division of physical labor, right? So in modern society, we sort of specialize in one thing, and we trade our money for everything else we need. So I'm a philosophy professor. I don't try to grow my own wheat or make my own clothes or things like that. So that's the physical. We live in a division of labor society. So there's also a cognitive element to that. So the idea is trust is indispensable, so we have to rely on others in much of what we know. Here's just a quick example, and this sort of just illustrates how interconnected we are. So there's this experiment people did about, this is called the illusion of understanding, or the illusion of knowledge, something like this. So people are asked, and this is just a simple experiment, do you know how a zipper works, right? And you just ask people, do you know how a zipper works? If I ask people in this room, probably people say, yeah, I use a zipper every day, I know how a zipper works. It's pretty simple. Okay, but then people are asked, okay, draw it out. So you say you know how a zipper works. And by the way, they ask, so use a Likert scale. So from 1 to 7, how much do you know a zipper works? People are like, yeah, I know what a zipper is, so maybe 6 or 7, I know how a zipper. And then people are asked, all right, draw out, how does the, how does the thing join the two sides or whatever? Draw it out, and then people try to, it's how does that work again? And then they're asked again, now how do you feel, how do you know a zipper works? Then it goes down to 3 or something, right? Turns out I don't know how a zipper works, right? You can run the same thing with toilets and bicycles. These are all simple objects, right? So one metaphor here is we kind of, our knowledge really is extended, right? So we're kind of extended minds. So you think, why do people think they know how a zipper works, even if they don't really? Well, they think, look, if I really have to find out how a zipper works, I can go on Wikipedia, or I can go somewhere. It's at my fingertips knowledge. But here's a a metaphor for the gamers out there, at least this is, I don't know, I used to play games in high school. I don't play them anymore, but I don't know, maybe nowadays they're much more better. But back in the day, it's like, especially when you play like a real-time strategy game, you move the map and it's kind of coarsely pixelated, and then you zoom in, then the resolution goes up, right? So one metaphor is like we have to rely on others to zoom in. We might have a sort of coarsely pixelated, like, okay, zippers, toilets, I kind of know how they work, but really, if I had to find out what the mechanism is, I'd have to zoom in. But I have to rely on others to zoom in is the idea. Okay, so then I have this idea which I developed in the book that, look, we're kind of in it together when it comes to knowledge. So for the philosophers out there, I know there's some philosophy professors here. We're in it together, epistemically speaking. So we're kind of in it together when it comes to knowledge. Okay, so there's this problem called the commons problem. So climate change is a commons problem. So our oceans, the atmosphere, these are all commons. And then economists and political scientists have studied commons problems. So think of ecosystems like lakes. So a lake is a commons. And there's a problem that comes up with these commons is that each person within the system has an incentive to, so take the lake, each person has an incentive to overfish. The idea is if we all overfish, the stock is depleted and we all sort of suffer as a result. So you might think of climate change like this. So each of us has an incentive to, I don't know, what causes climate change? Well, like traveling a lot and eating steaks and so on, because apparently cows are especially bad for the climate. Okay, but each of us has an incentive to drive a bigger car, travel a lot, eat steaks. But if we all do that, then climate change happens, and that's bad for all of us. Okay, so I think there's an epistemic analog to this. So this is W.K. Clifford. He's a sort of quasi-forgotten philosopher, but he's a 19th century philosopher, and he's I think the progenitor of this idea, which I've tried to develop in my work, that look, our knowledge is kind of like a common property. So he says our lives are guided by that general conception of the course of things which has been created by society for social purposes. Our words, our phrases, our forms and processes and modes of thought are common property, fashioned and perfected from age to age. And people have different ways of putting this. Some people talk about the zeitgeist, there's a kind of spirit of the age. But it's really like we're less, the point is we're less like self-reliant than we might think, right? So just as, if you say, okay, if you tell me, all right, don't rely on others for anything, it's like, wait, how do I get my food and water and clothing? Like there's no way I can, rely on myself to survive. But it's like that with knowledge too. So we might think like, oh, these are my ideas, or these are my. But really, I mean, we're absorbing things from this surrounding perspective. Okay, so if there is this commons, so I want to make a sort of analogy with the climate change argument. So what should we do about climate change? I think we all have a responsibility to do what we can to mitigate climate change. I think that's plausible. We have these kind of commons-related responsibilities. So if we're all in it together, and there's this important resource, we all have a duty to preserve it, right? So we all have a duty to preserve our oceans. It's not cool to like just litter in the ocean or whatever. We should all do our part. Okay, so likewise, if we're in it together when it comes to knowledge, what duties might we have in that respect? So, and that's where I'm going to defend the duty to speak and the duty to listen. So two kind of faces, two sides of the coin here. This is a bit of a technical-ish example, but I hope it's clear. Here's this sort of setup I have in mind, and this is just an illustration of how things can go down. This is sometimes called hidden profiles by psychologists and management scholars. So here's the problem. So imagine there's this dam, and there's this community. So the dam, let's say, is important for the community, and the community is invested in believing the dam's going to succeed. But whenever you have this kind of what philosophers call, or psychologists call, affective investment, so you care about the conclusion, and whenever groups care about a conclusion, they create social pressures, right? So the groups have these dynamics to sort of suppress the naysayers or the haters or whatever. So here's the setup. Imagine, okay, so there are 2 reasons to think the dam will stand, and there are 3 reasons to think the dam will collapse, okay? And imagine each of these reasons is equally strong. So they got 2 reasons for, 3 reasons against, so the 3 wins out, right? So the dam is going to collapse. Again, this is an artificial example, but I'm just using it to illustrate. The 3 reasons, so imagine like weights on a scale, and each side you put some reasons, right? So 2 reasons to think it'll stand, so okay, the dam's constructed with good materials, whatever. 3 reasons to think it's going to collapse. Okay. Now you have 3 engineers, and here's the problem I want to illustrate. The reasons to think the dam is going to collapse are distributed across the engineers. So they're hidden profiles. So there's this information that suggests the dam's going to break is distributed, so it's not commonly held. Now each engineer thinks like, okay, so I have these letters there. So engineer A knows R1, R2, and R3. Then she thinks to herself, okay, I know this, I have this one doubt, which is R3. If I say it, I'm just going to get in trouble. Other people are going to think I'm a naysayer. But it's going to stand anyway, given R1, R2, R3. So I'm not going to say it. Of course, each person thinks that way, and then basically they come to a false view of the world. So they think the dam's going to stand, but the dam will collapse, sadly. So the group is sort of irrational in this sense. So it's a sort of what we might call an epistemic collective action problem. Okay, so that's an abstract example. You can run this with polarization. So this is a chart of polarization. In the 90s and 2000s, it looked like people were much closer to each other. I went to college in the 2000s, and the vibe I got from college was like, there were liberals and conservatives, but like it didn't come up much. People would say like, oh, I'm conservative, but my roommate is liberal, but we get along and so on. It just wasn't a thing. I think something happened in 2013. I don't know what happened exactly, but something happened. I think that's the date, 2013. Maybe future historians will be like, what happened in 2013? Anyway, but so you see 2014, boom, there's this shift. Okay, so how might this happen? Again, if you get this kind of social pressure dynamic, so say, look, suppose you're on a team red, team blue, doesn't matter. You agree with your team on most things, but there's one thing you disagree with. Maybe it's police and crime, or maybe it's minimum wage laws, or maybe it's environmental policy. You say, hey, look, I agree with my team on all this. I disagree on this one thing, but hey, I'm not going to go ahead and say it. I mean, I might lose friends. Think about Facebook posting. So might think oh, I just disagree with them on this one thing, but I'm not going to post that on Facebook. Okay, so as a result, all the sort of all the disagreement gets weeded out in this way, and then eventually you get this. The worry is you get this sort of polarization. Okay, so what I want to say is social pressure. Again, we don't have to worry about people aren't not posting on Facebook about their true opinions. They're not worried about, again, the police coming and putting them in jail. They're worried about social sanctions. Maybe they're not going to get invited to the next party. Or professional sanctions. Maybe they will lose out with respect to some job. Okay, so that's the kind of thing. The social pressure can cause reasons only on one side of the debate to pile up within a context. Then you get this homogeneity. So let me illustrate this with some diagrams. Okay. And this can affect science as well, and my hot take is that it does affect science. Here's what social pressure can do. Let's say like red is evidence against something, green is evidence for something. But if the scientific community is invested in reaching the green conclusion, then they can disincentivize research into the red. So maybe they don't get grants if you're defending red, or if you defend red, you might not get a job, or if you defend red, it might not get published. There's a peer review and editorial. Okay, so then how do you? Here's why it's a big problem. So you say, on any issue, how do you decide like what is the cause of poverty, or what should we do about climate change? Any issue like this. The thing to do nowadays is to look at the peer-reviewed literature, right? So that's the standard. Like, look at the peer-reviewed literature. That is what we want to do. But here's the problem: if the peer-reviewed literature is affected by such processes, then you're getting this sort of biased subset, and that's not really representing the world as it is. Here's another example. So, suppose there's this jar with it's basically a sampling error, there's biased sample process. So imagine there's red and blue marbles. The jar contains 100 marbles. Simple case, you're like blindfolded and you draw 10 marbles from the jar and you look at the marbles. You get 8 blue and 2 and imagine the jar has been shaken and everything. So you take the marbles and you see 8 blue marbles and 2 red marbles. So okay, so then you look at that and say, you consider the claim there are more blue marbles than red. I think you can work out the math and you can use some statistics to work out the math, but you can be fairly confident that there's more blue marbles than red, right? So that's just like how polling works. Okay, but now you learn that, hey, the red marbles are actually heavier. Some iron was put in there to make them heavier. And, when you shake things, the heavier things go down. And you sampled from the top. Now consider the same proposition or claim. There are more blue marbles in the jar than red. I think you can't anymore make that claim, right? So just as an example, suppose you say, I did some polling, and I just know the next election the Democrats are going to win in a landslide. It's just not going to be close. It's just going to be like, it's just going to be like a full-on victory, not a single seat to the Republicans. You say, oh, that's interesting. How did you come to that? You say, well, I did a poll and I got like 80% Democratic voters. Say, oh, that's interesting. Where did you conduct the polling? Oh, we just went to Berkeley, California. It's like, so you're like, well, okay, now, okay, you can't really make that, because you're getting a biased sample there. You need a distributed sample, right? Okay, so then this is John Stuart Mill, the most famous defender of free speech. And he says, look, any claim that you can put your confidence in, it must be open to contestation. And I think, he doesn't put it in terms of samples and peer-reviewed literature, but I think he's worried about that kind of thing. If we have an effective investment in reaching some idea and we quash dissent, again, it need not be legal. It could be like social pressure, professional pressure. Then that undermines the amount of confidence we can put in it. So He's writing in 1859 when Newtonian physics is like the gold standard of physics. He says, if even the Newtonian philosophy were not permitted to be questioned, mankind could not feel as complete assurance of its truth as they now do. So he's basically saying, look, Newtonian physics is this thing we take for granted. Of course, now we don't, because we know with the privilege of hindsight that Einstein would come and basically say Newtonian physics is wrong. That's his special and general theories of relativity. But what he's saying is, look, what Mill is saying is, look, at the time, even our most precious theory, or even our most solid theory, Newtonian physics, if you say, hey, you can't question it, he's worried about, well, suppose you said, hey, you can't question it, or if you can't get a job if you question it, then Einstein would not have had the sort of wherewithal to question it later, right? So he's saying, look, any claim in which you put your faith in, it has to be open to contestation. Here is Helen Longino, a emeritus, I believe. She's retired, professor of philosophy at Stanford. She's wondering how science can be objective, and she says, only if the products of inquiry are understood to be formed by the kind of critical discussion that is possible among a plurality of individuals about a commonly accessible phenomenon can we see how they count as knowledge rather than opinion. So she thinks diversity of viewpoint is essential, especially in science. So she's talking about like what makes science objective. I mean, the problem she's wrestling with is something like this. Look, each of us individuals, we have biases, right? So we all have biases. I have biases. You have biases. Okay, so then there's this principle called garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. But how is it possible? Well, scientists are people too. They're not like angels or something. They're just, I mean, some of you might become scientists, right? So so how is it that you put in a bunch of biased people and out comes this thing that we're supposed to trust and that's objective, aka science? It seems like garbage in, but awesomeness out. How does that happen? Right? And so she's saying, like, well, it has to be structured a certain way. Here's Glenn Lowry. He's worried about social science. So he says, some areas of social science inquiry are so closely linked in the public mind to sensitive issues of policy that an objective scholarly discussion of them is now impossible. So all these issues about public discourse, I think they're, maybe there's a temptation for some people to think like, well, this is what happens out there in politics and on Twitter, but in science and in social science and academics, it's not really a problem. It might actually be a huge problem there, according to Glenn Lowry. So then he says the notion of objective research on the employment effects of the minimum wage, say, on the influence of maternal employment on child development can have no meaning if when such results are reported, other scientists are mainly concerned to pose the ad hominem query, just what kind of economist, sociologist, and so on would say this. So what he's worried about is then if you create this condition, people are going to be self-censoring, right? So they're going to say, look, if I publish this, I'm going to get flack. Especially if you're not tenured, you're generally vulnerable. Even if you are tenured, you might lose out on grants or things like this, or promotions. Okay, so to the extent that's right, this is a big problem, and it's a meta problem, because we might settle on a distorted picture of the world that is and that's both intrinsically bad, because knowledge is good. At least we philosophers like to think that, and likely to result in misguided policies. Okay, so what does this mean for individuals? So what about the duty to speak and duty to listen? So I think speaking our mind presents a kind of collective action problem. So in other cases, so climate change is a collective action problem, and one of the ways people are trying to mitigate climate change is through the law, right? So you might have a carbon tax, or you might say you can't use this pollutant, or you might have some global treaty. So those are all legal solutions. You can't have like a global treaty to like speak your mind or something. You can't, right? You can't have a law that says, "Hey, don't self-censor yourself." It's a law, you can't do that. Okay, so that's where I think social norms and morality must come in. So it's a matter for morality. This is a bit philosophy, so I apologize to the non-philosophers. The duty I propose in this book is an imperfect duty to share evidence, at least sometimes when there's social pressure to do so. So sometimes there's social pressure and you think, oh, I'm going to lose some status for this. I think at least sometimes we should be willing to take the hit for the common good. Okay, so research and publication ethics, I think there's an upshot here. So if we think of our stock of knowledge as a common good, to improve that, I think there's a lot more potential to improve it by defending understudied / unpopular arguments and ideas. Sorry, I'm going to do some inside baseball. So in philosophy, we have this thing, or I mean in any field, you have these things called epicycle literature. So there's like a small minor problem, and then there's like millions of papers written on like trying to find the little moves within a particular literature. Hey, if that floats your boat, that's fine, but there's much more opportunity, I think, to do interesting work by sort of picking the low-hanging fruit rather than epicycle stuff. Okay, so what about listening? I'm running out of time here. Listening. In the case of any person whose judgment is really deserving of confidence, how has it become so? Because he's kept his mind open to criticisms of his opinions and conduct. So what Mill is saying is like it's not just enough to like speak your mind all the time and say what you think. It also, to have justified beliefs, it also requires that we engage with others, especially people who disagree. So his idea is that any idea worth its salt must be tested. And how is it tested? Well, it's tested with others. So I want to say, hey, listeners play a critical role here in preserving the epistemic commons, because listeners can help test out ideas, weed out bad arguments. Maybe even constructive listening can help speakers strengthen their arguments. There's this really cool book by cognitive scientists Hugo Mercier and Sperber who say, really, like, if you think of human reasoning, what is human reasoning and what is special about it? They say, and I'm going to go through this quickly because I'm running out of time, but they say, look, reasoning is really essentially dialogical, so it's really essentially to be done with others, so we don't reason by ourselves. So reasoning is not like playing solitaire, it's like playing tennis. You can't play tennis without partners. So okay, so if Mercier and Sperber are right, then look, listeners, especially engaged, not just passive listeners. So I don't want to say, hey, like we should listen in terms of like passively listening, being like, yeah, right, okay, right? That would be passive listening. But really engaged listening. So the thought is, okay, you said that, but that didn't quite make sense to me. Can you help? Can you help? I mean, not just in a dishonest way, but like in a genuine way, right? Where we're trying to figure out where the other person's coming from. Okay, should I stop soon? Do you have the time? Should I stop soon? Okay, right. Okay, I'll just. I wanted to end with just a couple of thoughts about speaking and listening and human flourishing. So I'm going to go very quickly through this. Okay, so Aristotle, so going back to the OGs of philosophy, Aristotle thought that, look, humans have a kind of special function. or what he called ergon. And to live well is to exercise that ergon well. So he has this broader theory which that comes out. Okay, so what is our ergon? What makes humans special, basically? And he's saying, like, look, what makes us special is our rational capacities. We can take issue with that, but he's kind of looking at the world, saying, look, the world has lots of things in it. You got rocks, planets, frogs, birds, the sun, and humans. Okay, so what's special about humans? They have rational capacities. So what I want to say here is, if reasoning is something we do together, then exercising our rational capacities well really means like speaking and listening, and not just going to the cave and sort of doing solitaire, right? So if Aristotle's right, then we need to be sort of reasoning with others. Okay, I'm gonna skip over these and end with a quote I recently found from Jesus. Okay. And this is from, so take this with a grain of salt, but this is from the Gospel of Thomas, which is considered non-canonical. Some people got together in the early part of Christianity and they decided this was not one of the canonical Gospels. But it's a really interesting Gospel, and this verse kind of stood out to me. This is about, speaking your mind. So Jesus says in verse 70, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. So he's saying, I guess one interpretation of that is saying, like, it's a defense of authenticity and expressing your true self. So that the concluding thought is, speaking your mind and listening might not just be good for us as a whole, but also good for us as individuals. All right, thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Professor Joshi, for your presentation. It was really interesting. Now we'll hear from our formal respondents before turning to our audience for further questions and comments. Our first formal respondent is Angel Eduardo. He is a senior writer and an editor at The Flyer, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions.
Thank you very much. In your presentation, you had some data from 2020 comparing the self-censorship to McCarthyism. I can give some more updated data. My organization, FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, we do what's called the College Free Speech Rankings every year. This is our 6th year doing it. We just released our most recent data. It surveys 68,000 college students at over 250 campuses. I don't believe they did the survey at this campus, although CSUS is in our database as a yellow light school because there are some free speech policies or free speech threatening policies that are in place. So it's better than a red light school, but not quite as good as a green light school. So look into that, guys. And I'll just share really quickly, forgive me for reading this off of my phone, but some top line results from the data we found. Real quickly. Okay, we surveyed students on the following questions. How comfortable would you feel doing the following on your campus? Publicly disagreeing with a professor about a controversial political topic. 23% said very uncomfortable. 36% said somewhat uncomfortable. 31% said somewhat comfortable. And only 10% said comfortable, very comfortable. Expressing disagreement with one of your professors about a controversial political topic in a written assignment. 16% very uncomfortable, 34% somewhat, 37% somewhat comfortable. Expressing your views on a controversial topic during an in-class discussion. 17% very uncomfortable, 35% somewhat uncomfortable, 37% somewhat comfortable. So the numbers are not great when it comes to that, and I think it speaks to the larger problem that you were discussing. And also, you mentioned the year 2013. Just so happens that FIRE President Greg Lukianoff points to 2014 as the beginning of what he calls the age of cancel culture, which he defines as the uptick beginning around 2014 and escalating in about 2017 of campaigns to get people fired, disinvited, deplatformed, or otherwise punished for speech that is or would be protected by First Amendment standards, and the climate of fear and conformity that has resulted from that uptick. So I think the numbers that I just read off to you, and you can look more into them yourself at thefire.org, speaks to the effects of this larger climate of silence and dissent, punishing nonconformity, and the consequences of that, as you spoke to, we stop seeing what's actually happening. We stop knowing what people are actually thinking, and as a result, so much of our work actually can't get done. But I'm curious what you would say to the question of, there's some things that are just settled. We just know some things. Some things are just known. Like, do we really have to entertain flat Earth? Do we really have to entertain, racism, right? Are these conversations worth having, or shouldn't we just shut these people up, tell them they're wrong, and go on about our day? What do you have to say about that aspect? Which I'm sure that question comes up for me a lot, so I'm sure you hear it too.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so, so I had some slides about this, which I quickly, but yeah, that's a great point and an important question. So, certain things are settled. In my opinion, I think, for example, the flat Earth is a good case. So flat Earth is a good. So what is the thought there? Well, it's settled that the Earth is roughly spherical. Like, we don't have to entertain as a live possibility. Like, oh, if I keep sailing west from here, will I fall off, or things like this. You don't have to entertain that as a live possibility. Another one is this idea of phlogiston. So that was a theory in chemistry. So people thought that there's this thing called phlogiston, that when things burn, like, the phlogiston comes out. And now modern chemistry, there's no phlogiston, right? It's just, you understand, I don't know if I'm pronouncing phlogiston correctly, but you understand, you understand what's happening without reference to phlogiston. So, so I want to make a distinction here between things that are sort of no longer taken seriously for epistemic reasons or for scientific reasons, and things that are not taken seriously for social or political, ideological reasons. So the slide I was just going to talk about is this communication scientist from the 20th century who had a book called The Spiral of Silence. So her idea was, and she was talking about how even a minority, sort of coordinated minority, can silence a majority, right? And what happens over time is, so the majority is sort of scattered and the minority is coordinated. Coordinated minorities in history can wield a lot of power. So what can happen is, over time, the majority opinion just sort of disappears, or people stop saying what they think, owing to social repercussions, fear of social repercussions. And so ideas that are settled by that process, I think, so there's that distinction between settling it through the scientific process without social pressure, and settling it through this process of social and ideological pressure. And then maybe, on those topics, I think there can be cases where something is settled not so much due to, like, scientific research or sort of dispassionate thinking, but just due to social forces. And there, I think, free speech, or an ethos of, not just legally protected, but an ethos of free speech is really important for understanding the world. Yeah. And Mill talks about this. So he says it's not always, like, it's a mistake to think like progress always happens. Like, you know, sometimes we settle on false views, right? Through and there can be a temptation to think, hey, we've already settled that. Like, why revisit it? But if the process that caused that is sort of a process of social pressure rather than scientific research, then it's something where we need to recultivate, I think, the ethos of free expression.
Thank you, Professor. Our next respondent is a CRC Honors Program alum, Yasmin.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi. I really enjoyed your presentation. I have about 2.5 questions, and I think I'm just going to ask them, and you can decide which is the most fruitful and respond to whichever one you like.
Sounds good.
So I really liked how you used the concept of cognitive division of labor. It reminded me of Putnam's semantic externalism. And on that point, how do, as lay people or people outside of the scientific community, do we interrogate for or control for accuracy and integrity of intellectual production when it is partially dependent on our trust in other cognitive laborers? I guess in that same vein, how do we maintain epistemic commons when there might be actors, political or economic, with an interest in promoting bad or inaccurate information within the epistemic commons, like historical revisionism or deceptive reporting? And finally, can speaking your mind on these issues make a difference without some point of authority or a platform?
Oh, great! Yeah, so those are great questions. Yeah, right. So what if? Yeah, one question is, well, what if you don't have the authority or platform, right? It's sort of like you might speak your mind, but what if there's no uptake, right? There, I want to just go back to this idea that sometimes we can make, and this was there in the previous talk as well, right? So that we can make a difference even though it's not obvious to us at the moment, right? It takes time. So you might think, I mean, everybody starts off with zero platform, right? Except for maybe princes or something, or kids of billionaires or something. Maybe they come with a golden platform, as it were. So, but okay. So the rest of us start off with zero. So you have to start somewhere, I think, is one thing to say there. The other thing on trust, and that's really an excellent point. How do we know? So we take, and this is really the point I want to hammer home is, look, we have to take a lot on trust. And even, there's this really nice paper in philosophy from '91 called The Role of Trust in Knowledge by John Hardwick. And he says, you might think science, oh, we don't take anything on trust, we verify everything. That's not really what's going on. So scientists work in, so apparently the latest, the Higgs boson paper, right, where they discovered the Higgs boson in the accelerator, that paper has 5,000 authors, right? So nobody's doing that work by themselves. So what is going on with that? Even in that paper, a lot is being taken on trust. So maybe one person is a theoretical physicist. They have to rely on the data people. The data people have to rely on the theoretical physicists, vice versa, right? So even within science, the trust is really inescapable in knowledge. Okay, so how do we build this trust? And part of my project is saying, like, look, the more these kind of social pressures crop up, especially within the scientific domain, maybe they don't crop up as much in like solid state physics or chemistry, where people aren't going to get invested in like one polymer being one way or the other. Is like, oh, I really care about it. But things like in many areas of social sciences, even in philosophy and ethics, political philosophy, people can be invested in a certain conclusion, right? And so that can then create social pressures. And what Mill is saying, and what I think I agree with him, is the more you find that social pressure, the less trust is warranted, right? I mean, the thing I want to emphasize is like, it's not, so we ought to trust in science in general, but it's not something like, oh, there's this thing called science, and once you apply the label, now you got to trust it, right? There's a question about like what makes mean, there's many areas of inquiry. There's astrology, there's homeopathic medicine, so they believe in these like diluted sugar pills, and you take them and they can solve, apparently. Okay, so we think homeopathic medicine is not legit, but why is that, right? They could call it homeopathic science, right? It's not just the word that does the magic. There's Scientology that has science in it, so should we trust Scientology? Maybe not, right? So okay, so you can't just call something science and say, okay, now trust it, right? So the condition, and this goes back to Helen Longino, like conditions have to be right. So what are the conditions? That's something for all of us to think about. But the more you have these social pressure dynamics within science, the less trustworthy it becomes, I think. Thank you.
For your response, Professor Joshi. Our next respondent is also my fellow Cosumnes River College Honors Program student, Darren McBride.
Thank you, Professor Joshi. I really appreciated that insightful presentation. And I also think it was really eye-opening to myself and everyone else in the audience to so many parts of like knowledge that we overlook and like is an oversight to us. And just really giving that perspective. And something I was really dwelling on throughout the entire presentation was I wanted to see your perspective in the case of the court, specifically jury duty. So my main question is, when you have a group of people they each have their own implicit bias and preconceived perceptions of other people and who the person being prosecuted is. With that, is there a social pressure that is implicitly inherent when they are presented to the person face to face, and like when they have those biases and you're seeing that person, would that be preventative of allowing what I would call a successful, like, I guess, conclusion to the case?
Great, yeah, thanks so much for that. That's a great question, and to think about like these dynamics in the case of juries. Let me say a bit about like what the motivation for juries is, right? And I think the juries, the idea is that it's a jury of your peers, right? So it's a way to mitigate maybe the bias of the judge, right? Because the judge is one person, and one person can easily be biased, or you can, bribe off judges or things like this. So if a jury is randomly selected from the population, the thought is it's going to be hard to bribe them all and things like this, right? So there's like less potential for corruption. There's that thing, and then there's also like, well, juries are ideally meant to represent the population, right? So they're not meant to just come from like one class, which might have their own biases, or another socioeconomic status, or whatever. Could be gender, race, things like this. So ideally, they're sort of like diverse enough where they kind of mitigate each other's biases. And so that's, I think the idea of the jury sort of acknowledges that there's this like, as individuals, and why 12, right? Why not like one juror, right? The thought is, well, one person is going to have their biases, right? So ideally with 12, of course you can ask like, well, why not 11 or 13? Maybe 13 is an unlucky number, so maybe why not 14 or 10 or something? But okay, 12 is a kind of nice number. We might think like, okay, that's enough people to check their biases, check each other's biases, right? And especially, I mean, this is relevant, sort of politically or ideologically, because the thought is, in any kind of scientific system or any kind of deliberative system, if you have enough diversity of thought and diversity of perspective, and diversity in all the different areas. The hope is people kind of check each other's biases, so there's like less of a potential for groupthink, right? Which is the worry. But that being said, there's this, I think, one piece in the literature that follows up from what you're sort of concerned about is this idea of there's this phenomenon called group polarization. So in group polarization, the thought is So they run this on different issues. But for example, if you take a bunch of people that are just mildly pro-life, let's say, they're not like gung-ho, they're just like, I think I'm kind of pro-life. Put them together and ask them to like deliberate. They'll come out being very strongly pro-life. So they kind of feed each other's biases, right? And same vice versa. So people that are like mildly pro-choice, put them together, they're going to come out very strongly pro-choice. And they've run this on lots of different things. You can run it on minimum wage, affirmative action, whatever it is, right? So the danger here is you put like-minded people together, they end up not canceling each other's biases, but reinforcing them, and they come out even more extreme. So there's a big literature on this groupthink phenomenon. So anyway, going back to jurors, at least the hope in the system is something like if people are kind of taken as a random sample, so it's not just all Republicans, Democrats, particular race or gender, then they'll ideally not fall prey to this thing which you're alluding to, which is group polarization, right? So they'll cancel each other. Also reminds me of that movie 12 Angry Men, which is sort of, if people haven't watched it, it's an old movie, but it's worth watching. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your responses. We'll now turn to your audience for any questions or comments. Dr. Schubert will moderate this portion of this session.
We have two microphones running the two sides of the room. If you would kindly get the attention of one of the people with the microphone and wait your turn. We appreciate your participation very much. First question or comment?
Hi, I'm going to go straight to the practicality of this. Let's say we want to build a committee to find out the truth of a specific topic. How would you go about building structures for that committee in order to prevent groupthink or group polarization for that topic, no matter what, like biases that happen to be in that committee?
Yeah, great question. So there's work being done by psychologists now, which is really cool. It's led by Philip Tetlock, who is a professor of either psychology but he's a psychologist, but at UPenn. And they have this idea of adversarial collaboration, right? So the idea is pick a policy topic like, does X cause Y? Or, what should we do about something? The more sort of dry it is, right? So the more it's like, does this molecule dissolve in this whatever? It's like, okay, nobody really cares in that sort of affective sense, right? But on questions of social or political importance, the thought is adversarial collaboration would be get scientists from who have different preconceived ideas about the thing. To that question, especially if it's ideologically salient, so social political issues, and then put them together in the team. So maybe ideally, it would be, say, a co-authored paper, maybe of 5 or 10 scientists, right? So have sort of ideological diversity beforehand in that team. That's one thing to say. I know Haidt was mentioned a few times. So Jonathan Haidt and others have argued that, and this is relevant to our current context, that universities and sort of scientific communities in general could use a lot more ideological diversity, precisely to hopefully not fall into the problem of groupthink and group polarization. And the thought there is, again, something like this. Look, scientists are people, okay? They're They're not angel. They're not. They you know, again, you know, that some of the people in this room could be maybe scientists, or they could become scientists, right? So scientists are just people like us. And so they don't have a special immunity to things like groupthink or group polarization. And if that's right, and if you know what we know about group polarization, this well documented phenomenon, one should worry about that also in the context of social scientific research. And so, yeah, ideological diversity would be what people like Steve Pinker and Jonathan Haidt have emphasized. Of course, the practicality of it, it's not obvious how sides of some issue, put them together, and so the ideal there is going to be each side is going to check each other's blind spots, right? So I could say more, but I'll stop there to see if there's other questions.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering about the imperfect duty to speak your mind. And I was wondering if that is stronger for those that are like, as they go, you know, kind of reversely correlated, as people go up there, they self-censor more. Are those the people that are self-censoring, do they have a stronger duty to speak their mind? Or is it just kind of equal for everyone?
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, this goes back to the second question, right? Like, you know, people are taken at different levels of seriousness depending on what their status is, right? So, and in general, I think this is like part of life, right? Like, if my mechanic tells me to take some antibiotics versus my doctor tells me to take some antibiotics, I'm going to trust the doctor more, whereas my doctor says I need a new engine versus my mechanic, right? So it depends on who the testimony is coming from, right? So, okay, so then one question is, as people go up in education, they self-censor more. You might think, hey, people with degrees in specific fields, maybe they're taken more seriously on that topic, and maybe they ought to. So if you're an expert within a certain field, one ought to have a special duty to speak your mind. I mean, not to get too sort of in the weeds of a sort of policy issue, but from what I've read about the COVID pandemic, this did happen where, you know, public policy experts sometimes, or epidemiologists sometimes, censored themselves so as not to like rock the boat. You know, because people are, professional incentives are like, you want to get your grants, you want to get your promotions, and you're worried that, hey, if I say this, I'm not going to get the next grant, or people are going to, so there was that pressure. But I think, yeah. And I think the other thing, I mean, I think tenured academics especially have a much stronger, I mean, tenure is meant to, what is the point of tenure, right? It's meant to prevent like these, it's meant to shield you from the worry that, hey, what if I say this, could I get fired, or might I not get hired? So it's hard to come to someone who's a graduate student, let's say just getting their PhD, and say, you should speak your mind. It's like, well, what if you do? They're worried about not getting a job if they speak their mind, right? But tenured professors, I think, have an especially strong duty, and they should use their tenure to, yeah, be more outspoken and free.
Hey, thank you so much for that. I really agreed with your ideas about our responsibility to share our thoughts and knowledge that we have to lead to better outcomes for everyone. I really noticed in that change around 2013, 2014, that's around the time everyone around me started spending a lot of time on social media on their smartphones. And so I wonder what you think the role of those major social media companies is in this divide that we have right now, and what our responsibility as individuals is to kind of address it, and what their responsibility is.
Yeah, no, that's great. As a non-social scientist, I can only speculate from the armchair, but that's what we're good at, right? Philosophers, we have the armchair. That's all we need. That's why we don't need big research budgets. You just give us some armchair and some notebooks. There's a joke that we don't even need waste baskets because we don't throw it away, you know. Anyway. Okay, yeah, so speculating from the armchair, I think it does seem to me like, yeah, maybe social media had something to do with it, and enabling group polarization, right? Because social media can allow you to like kind of, you know, now people talk about echo chambers or epistemic bubbles. You can self-select into epistemic bubbles, and then you never hear anything from the other side. There's a former colleague of mine who wrote this book called Moral Grandstanding, and his thought was there's this idea of moral grandstanding where we kind of, there's a dynamic where we can sort of one-up each other, right? So my friends, these authors of grandstanding, they talk about piling on. So there's a sort of social media encourages this piling on effect or ramping up. So somebody says, oh, this person should be fired for this. And then the next person says, no, firing is not enough. They should go to jail for this. And then the third one is, no, they should be tried for treason. And then you just ramp up. And each person is trying to show how like morally pure they are or something. So those dynamics seem like facilitated by social media. So that's some armchair speculation. But one thing I want to ask you actually, so the sense I get is 2013 something happened, maybe it was social media, and it ramped up. The sense I get is like, you can call it different things, but let's call it, say, cancel culture. I feel like the peak was 2020 to 21, and now things feel a bit more chill. Is that the sense you get, or is that just the vibes I'm getting? I don't know. Yeah. What do you think?
I feel like it's probably not as intense as it was around COVID. My thought was really more around the algorithms and the echo chambers like you were talking about. We really started to feel the effects of that. I think it kind of started around 2013, 2014, and then maybe peaked in
Right,
2020.
yeah, right. I mean, the algorithm is another aspect, right? Not just, it's like an algorithm can feed you what you want to hear. Yeah, I mean, that's a tough, because if the algorithm starts showing you things you don't want to see, then, because the social media companies want to maximize like user attention, right? And then if the algorithm starts showing you things you don't want to see, then you might zone out, you might tune out of the platform. So that's a tricky, yeah. But I guess, I mean, there is some individual responsibility there. Like maybe we should be willing to see more things that disagree with us, you know, even in our social media feed. And then our social media overlords will respond to that and start showing us more things we disagree with, which maybe could be good. Yeah.
We have time for just one more quick question.
There we go. So you mentioned that we all have a duty to speak, and I do agree with that. However, as you mentioned, there's a lot of social pressure. How would you go about facilitating, teaching, or just making room to allow for the sharing of information or debate? Because I think a piece of advice you gave was just to like take the hit sometimes, and
Yeah, right.
I generally think that's a bad idea because there are genuine consequences to sometimes speaking up, like a missed job opportunity, and not everyone is safe to have a 10-year academic. So how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think that's, you know, again, it's like easy to say to a fifth-year PhD student in this precarious job market, you know, in academics, there's like 300 applications for every job, you know, and even more sometimes. So then, you know, yeah, the cost can be really high. I mean, one thing in teaching, I want to say, just for teaching, one thing I try to do in my classes is just like at the beginning, just say like, I'm not going to grade you on whether you, and I teach stuff like contemporary moral problems. So that'll involve, for example, the abortion topic, and that's, of course, a very hotly contested topic. And in my classes, there will be people who on both sides of that. But I try to really emphasize like, look, I'm not going to grade you on what position you end up endorsing. Really, it's going to be on the quality of the argument, and that's I think the ideal, at least within philosophy, that we should try to do. Yeah, and also, I mean, just so I think as educators, we can do a lot of things to really. I mean, yeah, just going back to the first thing, right? I mean, that's terrible, right? If people are afraid to disagree with their professors about controversial, like that's not the point of education. Max Weber, the founder of sociology, has some nice things to say. Like he's wondering like what's the purpose of education? Like, what is it, you know? And he says like a teacher should really bracket their first order political views when they come into the classroom. I mean, it's fine to have political views, of course, but when you come into the classroom, you kind of like you're stepping into a certain role, and your role there is not like political activism, which you can do outside, like go join whatever club, pro-life or pro-choice club, whatever, that's fine. But in the classroom, so one thing for educators to do, I think, is to really, I mean, precisely to combat that worry, is to say, yeah, you're not going to get graded on whether you agree with the rest of your classmates or with what you think my views are. I at least try to make it so that they can't tell what my views are, which yeah, anyway, so maybe that's an ideal. So thank you.
We are out of time for this session. Fortunately, we have 2 more sessions after this one today. Our next session will begin at 1:30 p.m. I hope to see you all then. Please join me in thanking our session chair, our formal respondents, and of course, Professor Joshi.